Hello, my name is Ratha I'm a community organizer, and I am honored to be here to do a special interview for Jovanka Beckles. Jovanka Beckles is running for AC Transit Ward 1, and I am an AC Transit rider in that district. I have been for a really, really long time. And, our intention of this interview is to provide other AC Transit riders and other voters in this district an insight to what it's like to be voting for a candidate like Jovanka. And just for a little preface, when I first met Jovanka, I met Jovanka. Oh, also, good morning, Jovanka. Sorry, I'm gonna.
Good morning, Ratha. Good morning, everyone.
Yeah, so thankful for you to have me. Yeah, I think I just wanted to give everybody a quick context to let everybody know who I am. So my name is Ratha Lai. I have been an organizer a community organizer in the Bay Area for a really long time. And I first met Jovanka when I was a student at UC Berkeley. It was at some random seminar that was all the way up the hill that I had to walk up a really long time to get up there, and it was a hot room full of like 11 people, and there was Jovanka, and I was in the back, and I remember her talking about her being Richmond City Council being on the Richmond City Council and working on the municipal ID. And that really touched me because the municipal ID was something for immigrant communities. And as a person of from an immigrant refugee family, that was just really, really powerful to see that type of leadership that was there. Jovanka, do you mind telling folks about like what that program was?
Oh, absolutely. Thanks again, Ratha, for inviting me on your show. And it really is an honor because you are, yes, as you mentioned, a longtime community activist and someone I deeply respect for your activism and love of community first. So yes, back in when I was on the Richmond City Council, I'm an immigrant myself. I want to just say I'm an immigrant. My parents immigrated from Panama in the 60s, and I came when I was about 9 years old to the United States from Central America. And so, the immigrant issues is close to my heart. And so when I had an opportunity on the Richmond City Council to implement a policy that allowed everyone, but we know that, in the immigrant community, it's often difficult to be able to navigate our community and, like bank and check out books from the library, etc., things like that. We know that that's a difficult task without an ID. And so during my time on the Richmond City Council, brought forward this policy that would allow us as a city to provide municipal IDs for people who didn't have a California ID. And that would allow anyone, immigrants, people who are running from domestic violence, folks who just are homeless, are houseless population, to be able to have an ID card that would enable them to bank, to check out books from the library, just all of the different types of activities where someone needed to have a state issued ID, but this would be an official city ID that all of our residents would be able to have. And I'm really proud to have been on the city council to be able to bring forward those types of policies. And I always say that, I don't, I don't believe that I am the smartest tool in the shed in any situation. And I think that that's what leadership is about. When you listen to the community, and the community says, these are the things that we need to be able to thrive. And that was one of the things that the community needed. It passed in the city council and we brought it forward. But the good thing, not unfortunate, but the good thing is, once we started to implement that policy, the state then started issuing state IDs to anyone who needed it. So I'm really proud that Richmond, we were always innovators, right? We were leading with a lot of policies that the state then recognized and realized that everyone needed to be able to afford the opportunity to have.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing. And yeah, so that was the first time I met you.
Yeah,
And we actually ran into each other, a few years later. I graduated and I became a community organizer
yeah,
after a year, a good year and a half at the Greenlighting Institute, which is a racial justice public policy institute. So awesome, amazing organization. And I was got hired at the Sierra Club Bay chapter as a
yeah,
community organizer to work for the Team Richmond campaign. So
yeah,
the second time I saw you was when you were going up against Chevron, and Chevron had put up over $4 million into the local elections.
yeah,
And what that $4 million looks like, for anybody who's wondering, that means your mailbox gets nonstop stuffed with political mailers and ads. All your digital ads get taken up. Like, I think that's when YouTube ads probably first started taking off, was
mhm,
was during that election.
yeah,
But that was an incredible election because we organized and we had so many volunteers come out and knock on doors and talk with community members to get to understand, what was the justice that we needed.
that's
And
right.
that was an incredible campaign that you were a part of. And I think from then on, I don't even know how many times we have crossed paths in different arenas, but I have always really, really appreciated and have been inspired by all the different campaigns that we've worked across.
Yeah,
So my time with the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, working with the Refinery Caps campaign, that was a really, really hard campaign against a lot of corporations as well. So it's not easy going up against corporations, and I commend you for every year going up into the leadership roles that you do.
well,
And
thank you,
yeah,
Ratha. If I may interject, I also I'm so appreciative of you mentioned APEN, as that's the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, and I remember doing so much work with you and the members of that organization who were so courageous. I remember the campaign where they came out with brooms. Where I don't know if you remember that, the Let's Clean Up Our Environment campaign, and so many of my Asian neighbors through that network came out and was instrumental in helping to get the message out about just how much of a polluter, right, the Chevron refinery was and continues to be. There still continues to be spills, and we know that that affects so many people in so many ways. Our older community members who suffer from breathing issues, heart issues, younger folks as well as older folks who suffer from asthma. And so to have really worked alongside the community during that campaign was really a phenomenal thing to see, because that was an opportunity that for me to have met so many people like Torm, that's and his leadership, in the community in the Richmond. He was really pretty instrumental in fighting and defeating Chevron, because folks recognize the relationship, the correlation between our health and the amount of pollution that refinery continues to spill.
absolutely. And yeah, and that brings me up to my next point is, the last time I saw you, we were talking about how you actually needed to take a break from work that we were doing, because it's definitely a grind. And I think a lot of us were encouraging you, like, making sure that, I know sometimes we'll just choose to burn out and be like a phoenix and rise again. But sometimes we have to be to care for ourselves. But that brings me to my point is, last time I saw you, we were talking about, what were your self-care plans, and now you're running for AC Transit Board. So why are you running for AC Transit?
Well, I do remember that conversation, and as many of you of course know how a grueling task it is running for Richmond City Council, You know, there's so many entities that are invested in keeping progressive candidates from winning. As you just talked about with the Chevron, and you know we have the Police Officers Association, developers who want to get their way. So there are so many entities that contribute to someone's mental stress. So having been the city council for 2 terms and really just fighting for what's right, it's amazing that people fight against that, fight against, you know, elected officials wanting to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour to something that folks can live with, right? A $15 hour minimum wage isn't even a living wage, but it certainly is. It should be the minimum wage. It's not a living wage, but it's a minimum wage. And to have people fight against that is really mind-blowing. To have people fight against rent control when folks need to have some stability is mind-blowing, right? But so I said, yeah, I'm just gonna be in the background and do what I can in that context. But then it wasn't until recently where the workers of AC Transit, which are represented by ATU, the Amalgamated Transit Union, Local 192, asked me to run, and they've been struggling for safety protections in the midst of this pandemic. And they're worried about proposed cuts and layoffs. They're concerned about the riders' safety in these COVID times. And so I'm running to fight for labor rights of our transit workers. And I'm running to save the public bus service that the East Bay's working class relies on heavily. These fights are so important to our working class communities of color who rely most on AC Transit as a means of transportation and a source of good jobs. So I'm running because I was asked to run because these working class folks know that I'm a champion for working people. I'm a champion for justice. And so that's why I'm running. And because I can't help myself, I love justice so much. I love standing for working people who are trying to get to work and who are just trying to earn a living. And when I see that there is a sort of a gap in that process, then I can't help but jump in. I don't like to physically fight, but I certainly love to fight for justice. And I will do that all day, every day, sometimes to the detriment of my health. But I believe in a future that we have to have a future for our children. And in the words of our Native American community, like we should be taking care of our planet for the next 7 generations, and I'm willing to fight for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, my 4-year-old daughter. I asked her a question. She asked me what I was doing today, and I broke it down to her. I kind of challenged myself to try to explain as much as I can to her, even if I had to Neil deGrasse Tyson to it. Usually, she'll just walk. She'll be like, "Oh, too much." But she was like, when I asked her, I was like, "What kind of, what you want in the bus?" And then she was like, "Candy." Candy. Yeah, candy. Okay. But what that does bring me to is like I hope that what you're talking about is part of that vision for our future, for a bus, a public transit system, like for the people. And I'll get back to that, but I definitely wanted to find out more because as an AC Transit writer and the pandemic and COVID-19 happening right now, having the free fares has been great. Sometimes I still have a little trauma inside me. Like, are they still gonna get me back? No, okay, all right, I'm good.
Enjoy the ride, right?
And so what's the situation like right now? What's going on?
Yeah, the current situation with AC Transit are that there are threats currently to cut services by about 30%. That would be awful. That would be terrible for people who are relying on the bus to get them to and fro. there's also challenges of safety for workers and riders. And I'm really just so incredibly proud to be a part of a community of organizers who organized to go before the MTC, who organized to go before the current board, AC Transit Board, to make these demands to make sure that there's plexiglass, that there is that people are that people are maintaining, yes, and practicing social distancing. Thank you. And that they're maintaining and practicing social distancing, and that there are PPE, so the protective equipment that they need. So we're talking about hand sanitizers and masks for every rider that gets on the bus. And I'm really proud to have been a part of that community effort that brought that to fruition. And so before the people, the riders and the drivers were having to fight for these safety measures. And it was because of the community coming forward and speaking that is now the case, that every single bus now has protective equipment. So every single bus now has face masks for the riders, as well as hand sanitizers, plexiglass, and social distancing.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and yeah, I remember that was implemented really, really, really quickly too. So all of that kind of took an effect like immediately. So I live in the San Pablo area right now, and the 72 comes right by my house, and
Yeah.
so being able to have that kind of access is
Yes. And then,
definitely.
and this is why political will is so important. This is why it's important to have elected officials who understand these things, because the current board, with the exception of maybe Mark Williams, maybe one other board member, but the majority didn't really see the urgency of bringing and implementing these types of safety measures. And it wasn't until the community came forward and made these demands that it happened. And so it happened because of demand. And when we have elected officials who understand the need for these things, like people shouldn't have to beg for what's
Yes.
right. It should just be a given that they understand, and it's done right away. It shouldn't take any kind of time, and the community, insisting and demanding these things to come into existence.
Absolutely. As a community organizer, the less organizing we can do, the better our community probably is.
Right. With elected officials who get it, because they're organizers themselves, right?
Exactly. And yeah, that's why I'm so glad that you're going to be running for AC Transit. I think one of my other questions is like, even before COVID-19 and going into post COVID-19, I feel like, the rider experience and safety is still a really big issue. Before the lockdown, I was riding on the 72 to Contra Costa College, and there was an elderly Asian woman that was sitting in the front, and another man that was not in the best state of mind. He was clearly distraught and needed some help. As we approached the stop at the college, as she was getting to walk out, he actually tried to spit at her.
Wow.
And it was really awful. And that was also part of the rhetoric that was being espoused at the time about the pandemic coming from China and all of this stuff. And I had my skateboard, and I kind of put myself in between, and I was just like, me, the other riders, and the bus drivers was just like, what kind of situation can we expect, or what can we be. The situation de-escalated. He was getting off on the next stop, and that was able to do that. However, to put riders in that situation, and to put bus drivers in that situation, I know is like really challenging. I also know, like, what I also know that, speaking from my place of privilege as a cisgendered male, my sense of safety isn't as put as forth as much attention as other folks who need and are vulnerable on that bus all the time, right?
Right.
So I think about all of that at the same time. So what are your thoughts, and what would you plan to create and remedy that situation?
Wow, I'm really so sorry that that happened to that elderly woman. That's really awful, and it's awful that drivers are often put in those types of predicaments. Like, what can they do? And we don't want to have uh, to rely on police, which can sometimes escalate these situations when you have people who are mentally, disabled, mentally challenged. And so, I think it's important that we make sure that AC Transit coordinates with other agencies and other agencies and providers in order to address the mental health crisis that currently exists. It shouldn't be the responsibility of drivers, right? We want to make sure that our communities have high quality public transportation and as well as the other essential services that we need, that they need to be able to thrive. So these are some of the issues that I know currently exist, and we can address it when we recognize the need to coordinate services and resources for the community to make sure that the riders are safe as well as the drivers, the workers.
Yeah, that sounds great, because I've definitely ridden AC Transit at all different types of hours at different parts of my life, and I think a lot of other riders would agree that there's people who use the bus as a place of refuge, and because they're not getting the services that they need.
Exactly.
Um, and yeah, so that was a great answer. Thank you, Jovanka. I think just to kind of wrap it up, I would kind of love to have a more fun conversation just about the future of public transportation. I'm in my early 30s, and so I'm not going to speak for my entire generation, but I think that there is a collective understanding of the society and that we've inherited, right? The difficulties and
Mhm.
challenges of
Mhm.
being able to replicate what the previous generation has done. And what I'm talking about is like being able to own stuff and own things, and not be in the student loan debt that many people in our generation are locked into. And
Mhm.
so what I see as the future, and as the future trend, as we see different industries get disrupted, in terms of what we define as ownership, I think public transit is kind of at the heart of that. So in terms of like, how do we create a community that addresses climate change? Because I definitely still want to enjoy myself,
Yeah.
and I want to experience the rest of the Bay. I also don't necessarily want to feel so responsible for consequences that are detrimental to the climate and other stuff. And there and also if these buses were the fleet of the future, in terms of like having Wi-Fi, cushion seats, you know go ahead, everything like the Jetsons bus, ultra missed all types of candy for the kids, sugar-free candy for the kids. you know what would be your vision of the future, after we've um yeah,
I,
in the court. Yeah, go for it.
I was gonna say no. I like your ideas. I love visioning. I love dreaming, and I'm a dreamer myself, and I think that when we have dreamers in office and who are organizing, that that's how we create a better world, and we listen to the dreams of our young people, of the babies. But my vision of AC Transit, I'm just gonna back it up a little bit and just tell you that. And our listeners, is that AC Transit riders are 75% people of color, and Asian Americans make up about 20% of the bus riders. So the issues surrounding AC Transit service have a big impact on people of color, including our Asian American community. Many of whom have no cars. So I'm going to be fighting to stop the cuts that are currently proposed, because right now, as I mentioned earlier, they're considering a 30% cut, which would devastate, our communities. These cuts would devastate people of color and low-income riders who are relying most on the bus service to get around to their destinations. So I'm not going to just be fighting the cut. My platform calls for expanding service so that the bus is universally accessible. I fought alongside the riders and transit workers to make sure that our buses are safe during these COVID times. Where I mentioned before, we were able to pressure the transit authorities to provide free masks and sanitizers to everyone. So I'm going to be calling. So the future of AC Transit for me is I'm going to be calling for the bus to remain fare free. That folks, public transportation is currently right now because of COVID are free. And I'm the only candidate running in this race who's calling for it to continue to stay fare free. You can just get on the bus, get where you need to go, get to school, get to your medical appointments, get to, the grocery stores, the markets. I think that that's going to be important. It's going to be important to make sure that folks have a way to get around, but it's also going to be a way for us to fight climate change, right? Climate change impacts, we know this, right? We know that climate change impacts mostly, the effects of it tend to be immigrants, tends to be working class people, people of color. And so that's why I'm going to be fighting to expand the service to eliminate it so we can increase ridership, we can get cars off the road, and we can reduce emissions. And so I'm going to be calling for a faster transition to a zero emission bus services. And so, as I continue to envision the future of AC Transit, I can also envision AC Transit, an AC Transit system that's high tech and that's clean tech, and that the service is reliable, and that our most vulnerable community members can depend on it, and it'll be reliable, not just in the hills, not just in certain areas, but it will be reliable to all of us, and that's my vision. I also think about, when I talk about the clean tech part of me, right now we do have the technology to be able to get on our phone and if we can hail a ride, we can certainly be able to look and see where the bus is at the time. So I'm running late. Is the bus running late today? Yes. Okay, good. It's on time. Good. Like, I know there is currently something like that in place, but I believe that with technology, it can become a lot more accurate. And that's what I envision as well for the system.
That would be amazing because, speaking for other AC Transit riders, next bus isn't always accurate. Yeah.
Yes.
So hearing that you would fix next bus, that sounds amazing.
The technology is there. It can be done. We just need the political will.
Well, Jovanka, I think that's it for all of my questions. I just for speaking to other voters who are in the area, even if you're not an AC Transit rider, how important it is to elect leaders who are in tune with the community and speak with the community and can be in touch with the community to bring forward these policies and laws. Because a lot of times what I find in my organizing and I've been so privileged to organize in Richmond with other amazing organizers, leaders, and organizations, is to see how much we just try. Mm-hmm. And even if we make a mistake, or even if we do something else like that, the fact that we're constantly looking at what harms us and remedy it, it shares and it replicates others. And I think that we have also seen that, happen to us too. So Jovanka, I'm gonna let you close it out with any last words you want, and then let people know how they find you. And I know you also have a lot of endorsements as well, so if you want to thank any of those endorsements, definitely go ahead. And thank you so much for letting me be a part of your campaign.
Thank you. I thank you, Ratha, and I just want to invite everyone and your listeners to vote early for Jovanka Beckles. You can find out more about me at jovankaforactransit.com. You can request yard signs. One of the yard signs is directly behind me. You can request that. We'll be happy to drop them off for you. talk to your friends and your relatives and your neighbors about this campaign to keep AC Transit free, to transition to a zero emissions fleet sooner rather than later, and to make AC Transit reliable, so that those who depend on it to get to work and appointments in school can get there on time. I want to encourage you to join this movement that is supported by so many environmental leaders and organizations. This movement that's supported by working people, so many unions and locals that are part of this movement. Ask that you support us and that you join this movement for the people, to have a government that works for us, to have a government that puts you, the people, over profits. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you out there. And I look forward to being your next AC Transit director.